Thanks very much, Tony, for meeting with me to discuss the Bilderberg Group, which is coming up in June in Switzerland. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what you know about this secretive group.
Well, this year's 2011 Bilderberg, it looks like it's taking place in St. Moritz in Switzerland. I think it's quite clear to me that Switzerland as a venue is very useful for the Bilderbergers because it's actually quite a high security country. It's not part of the European Union, which at Bilderberg is bizarre because Bilderberg has been a large part of actually creating the EU, and yet this meeting is taking place in Switzerland. Switzerland's a funny country, isn't it? Because remember, throughout the world wars we've had, Switzerland has been neutral. It was used quite a lot in the Second World War, for example, for laundering Nazi money. The Bank for International Settlements was based in Switzerland, which was basically a Nazi bank. And in the Bretton Woods Conference at the end of World War II, the resolution was passed to close down the Bank for International Settlements in Basel. And so there's a sort of, it's almost like it's a kind of elite country in Europe. It's kind of an internationalist nation. There is also quite a lot of democracy in Switzerland, but it's a funny place. It's quite cold. If you ever go to a place like Zurich, particularly the German parts of Switzerland, you find it's actually quite a cold country. The people aren't very warm, and it's a very, very money-based economy, clearly. You know, we've got all these numbered Swiss bank accounts, which Switzerland's famous for, and these are very dangerous. The reason why is because they can be used anonymously for transferring money. A numbered bank account can, for example, to hire a hitman. It's very difficult then to trace who has actually paid for that hitman to murder somebody because it's gone through this numbered Swiss bank account. The other thing is that there is a court case going through still where an employee of a Swiss bank actually went to WikiLeaks with a whole load of information about people who've been secretly squirreling away their wealth in these Swiss bank accounts and not paying tax on it. And of course this is one of the major problems we've got in the economic crisis throughout Europe and the United States, is a lot of the most wealthy people saw this coming and they made sure that their wealth was hidden, so it hasn't been taxed, and so therefore they're able to ride out this wave of austerity, keeping their savings intact. Now, in any kind of democratic society, what would be happening now is you'd have the wealthy being taxed to pay for public services. And of course, because they've managed to squirrel this away in places like Switzerland and in the Cayman Islands and other tax havens, mostly of which are British jurisdiction, funnily enough, then they've managed to basically to be immune from these austerity measures and from the depression. So Switzerland is a very interesting place for the Bilderbergers to be meeting this year. It's very much their home territory with the banking system. A lot of the world banking's the most important banks in the world based in Switzerland, and what with the UN in Geneva, a lot of these internationalist institutions are based there, and Switzerland seems to be almost like immune from any other major legislation. Yes, it's a neutral country. They keep saying they're neutral, but are they really neutral when it comes to the war that's starting to go on between the rich and the poor in the Western world now, with these austerity measures, with the poor basically being blamed for the frauds of the super rich and the bankers? So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this all transpires. As for what's going to be on the agenda this year, I think it's pretty clear that the Arab Spring, the uprisings in the Middle East, will be an important part of what the Bilderbergers are discussing this year, as well as the bailouts that have been going on in the Eurozone and of course in the United States. Now it's very interesting with the arrest of the boss of the International Monetary Fund, Dominique Strauss-Kahn. I mean, when you hear of a major arrest of one of these massive people involved in these massive financial institutions, it's almost like, well, isn't that about time that one of these people served a penalty for all of the horrors that they're visiting upon most of the population, these bankers? And that's the instant reaction I had, you know, when I heard, oh, Strauss-Kahn's been arrested. But actually, it's quite clear that what's going on here is political. It's not just about some encounter with a woman in his hotel room in New York. This is also about his left-wing plan to consolidate the debt of Europe, all these various central banks in Europe, and the Federal Reserve and the individual state banks in the United States, what he was planning to do the week after his arrest was announce a consolidation plan, which what we would do would completely change the ball game at the IMF negotiating table. Rather than the IMF being able to go around to each individual country, central bank, individually and negotiate individually in a kind of divide and rule fashion. We go to the Irish, we go to the Portuguese, we go to the Spanish. What it would happen then was you'd have the IMF on one side of the table and all of the representatives from all of the central banks, from all of the European countries and the US on the other side, speaking with one voice. So this would have completely turned around the power in the whole financial situation in the Western world right now, basically in the NATO zone now. And I think it was a very radical policy, and a policy that the international financiers were not prepared to stomach, so they found some reason to get him arrested in New York and to basically kick him out of the IMF, which has traditionally been run by a European economist or banker or politician right since the founding of the IMF. The World Bank has always been run by an American, with a European as a number two, and what's happened with Strauss-Kahn's arrest and the court case is basically the IMF is now being run from the US by an American who was the number two. So both the World Bank for the first time and the IMF both being run by the US in this crucial stage of the European bailout process. So all of this, of course, is going to be featuring, not necessarily on the terms I've just been talking about it, at this year's Bilderberg conference in St. Moritz.
How did you first come to find out about the Bilderberg Group, and how long ago was that?
Well, basically it was back in 1996. I was told, so someone came, I was actually at a land occupation in London, in Wandsworth, where a group I was involved with, The Land Is Ours, had squatted a piece of land for 6 months by the side of Wandsworth Bridge and built with a whole load of people who turned up on the day. It was one of those sort of mass trespass things where we took over the piece of land at sort of midday, and with about 150 people in coaches. And several weeks later, somebody actually turned up at the site and he said, "Oh, it's great what you're doing about the land question, right? This is brilliant." He'd seen it on the news. But what about the money question? And he said, "Do you realise that there's this group called the Bilderbergs that control most of the money in the Western world?" And I just thought, you're talking nonsense. But anyway, dutifully I scribbled down in my notebook, this Bilderberg, and it just so happened when I was back in Oxford, I had access to the Reuters Articles Archive database for a few weeks, and I thought, I'll put this group into there and see if anything comes out, because there was very little on the internet apart from these sort of right-wing conspiracy theories about the Bilderbergs. And then I got a list of the people who had attended this meeting. Now, if you look at the people on that list, they really are the most powerful people in the Western world. And what shocked me more than anything else was that there were also senior politicians were going along to these secret meetings. Now, I've got no problem with businessmen meeting up, even if it is to stitch up the public, because I think a lot of the time when business people do meet up, there is a conspiracy against the public going on. And there's nothing you can do necessarily about that apart from changing the laws on corporations and how they operate, because they're basically sucking in. All of our individual and personal wealth is being sucked in to big corporations and banks. But you can't stop these people meeting up unless you want to change the terms of reference on which these corporations operate and the banks operate. But what you can stop, and must be stopped, is elected politicians swearing oaths of secrecy before they're going along to these meetings and sharing privately with the world's financial elite their own secret ambitions for the direction that our economy and our country is going to take in the future. So yes, the royalty go. The royalty aren't necessarily, I mean, we're talking about 5 or 6 heads of state from around Europe. Probably the most powerful of which is Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands, who's a major, she's not just a royal, she's also a major shareholder in Royal Dutch Shell, and one of the biggest, in fact they are, I think, the biggest corporation in the Western world. Profits from Shell's annual profits dwarf many countries' profits. And of course, what we're seeing at the petrol pumps now is the price being hiked up and up and up. So there's no free market in oil anymore. It's all a manipulated market. And these big oil companies like Shell and Esso, Exxon, which owns Esso, get together and they basically fix the price. They're in a position now where they can control the flow of oil from the Middle East, from most of the countries that they now control, including Saudi Arabia and Iraq now. They can fix the prices. And so what's going on here is essentially we've got a bunch of oligarch oil barons and royalty from around the Western world all getting together, and the problem I have with it all is the secrecy.